Hello and welcome once again, everyone, to the Two Matts and a Jeff podcast. We're just some middle-aged guys that are talking sports. I'm Matt Moyer here with Matt Bannon and Jeff Moyer. And today's topic is the top NBA teams of all time. So we're not looking at a body of years and years. We're looking at an individual year, an individual team, and the best we think of all time. And we've developed our list independently, as always. So we'll see how they measure up with each other and how you think they measure up. So we're going to get started. I think, Jeff, you're going to start with your number 5 team of all time.
Well, I'll start here. I'm going to start with a team that I didn't get to see because I was just born. And that is the 1970-71 Milwaukee Bucks. They went 66-16 that year. They went 12-2 in the playoffs, of course, won an NBA championship. For those of you that know some basketball, this actually was Kareem's first team in the NBA. A lot of you probably know him from the Lakers, but he started with the Milwaukee Bucks, the Big O, and so they had some great players there, but also, again, I thought it was a really good team. When you start looking at teams, and we'll talk about some other things as we go through. But anyway, my team is the 70-71 Milwaukee Bucks.
All right. So I think back in those days, I think at that point he was still Lou Alcindor.
I believe he was still Lou Alcindor at that point.
I'm not positive, but I think so. My number 5 is the 82-83 Philadelphia 76ers. 65-17, 13-1 in the playoffs. Famous for the faux, but it was 4-5-4. Swept the Lakers, which as a Lakers fan, a Sixers fan, but more of a Lakers fan, is the killer. What I remember about this team is Moses, just his presence, obviously, because they lost to the Lakers in the 80 finals, I believe. And what also I remember about this, I wrote down here, is that in the Eastern Conference Finals, after they beat the Celtics, back in the day, the cover of Sports Illustrated was a big thing. And there was a picture of Dr. J on the cover, jamming and saying, "Take that, Boston." Mm-hmm. I probably still have that magazine, that Sports Illustrated somewhere or whatever. But yeah, Dr. J, Moses, Andrew Toney, back in the days, look up Andrew Toney, he was a scoring machine. Mo Cheeks, obviously, at the point, and Bobby Jones coming off the bench or whatever. So yeah. So the Sixers, 82-83 Sixers were my number 5.
All right. So some good teams there. My number 5 team is actually a team I didn't even want to put on my list. I didn't want to put this team on my list because I got a problem with the current super teams, and I don't like them. But I couldn't. A lot of places I looked would have had this team higher on the list, and you guys might have them higher on the list. Although if you left them off, I'm not going to blame you. And that's the 16-17 Warriors with Kevin Durant and blah, blah, blah. I can't even bring myself to talk about it. But, they were just a great team. Only one loss in the playoffs, and they won the title. And I don't even want to talk about them anymore. But I felt like I couldn't not put them on. So there you go. I should have made them an honor mention, but there you go.
Jeez, okay. All right, so my number 4, this is one of these teams that you could start picking various years, but for this year I picked the 85-86 Boston Celtics. They went 67-15 during regular season. They went 15-3 in the postseason. Obviously, the characters there: Bird, McHale, Parrish, and then DJ. But I thought very, very interesting, especially again those of you young, if any of you are young listening to us, the difference. Today's game compared to then, their 3 best players were all big men, and rebounders and scorers, but they were big men. I mean,
the young people were all going, "Who's DJ?"
Dennis Johnson.
That's what they're saying. So if you're Googling him, that's who you're looking up.
He was the guard, but yes, that's when you really think of that team, you think of those 3 big guys. And so anyway, I like I put in the 85-86 Boston Celtics.
All right, my number 4 is the 85-86 Boston Celtics. You said everything there. What's infamous, one of the things infamous about that team is Jordan dropped 63 on them in round 1 of the playoffs, and they swept the Bulls anyhow, beat the Rockets 4-2 in the finals. Danny Ainge, you probably know him, people watching probably know him as an
master executive.
Yeah, and robbing the Sixers of draft picks and everything. And Bill Walton was
Yep.
a sixth man on that team or whatever. He made his comeback
Right.
or whatever for his career and was a sixth man on that team. But yeah, 85, 86 Celtics were my 4.
So my 4 is the team I'll talk more about because I would enjoy talking more about them than I did my number 5 team. But when you look at a great team too, something I didn't say is, you know, and you guys mentioned it, is there like the great players that were on it make that great team, along with a great record, of course. And you got to win the last game of the season.
No, yeah.
You know, which, you know, there have been some pretty darn good teams with some pretty darn good records who didn't win the last game of the season. If you don't win the last game, you know. So I picked the 86-87 Lakers. So this was Magic, Kareem, Worthy, Brian Scott, Michael Cooper, 15-3 in the postseason, winning the title in 6 games over the Celtics, 65-17 record for the season. Their point differential, which I kind of liked as an analytic, I guess we'll say, was they scored 117.8 points per game average and held their opponents to 108.5, which is good, not as good as my higher up teams, but that's pretty good. But that's a Showtime team. That's an all-timer, in my opinion. You look at those names. When you can say a first name of a guy and everyone knows who you're talking about, Magic, Kareem. Now, I said Worthy, you wouldn't say James, but Worthy. If you don't know who James Worthy is, you should, because he's a fantastic player. And there's a number of other guys I didn't even list there who were pretty darn good on that team. So the 86-87 Lakers were my number 4 team.
All right, so going to my number 3. I'm going with Lakers, but I'm going with a different year. I'm going back in the day again, and that's the 71-72 Lakers. They went 69-13. And then 12-3 in the postseason. Some things I wrote is that they won an NBA record of 33 straight wins. They had 33 straight wins. Think about that. I mean, that's a lot of wins in one time. Anyway, so they had, which I found interesting. I guess just because it was Wilt's later years, but. When you think of Wilt, you think, oh my God, he must be the high scorer, and he wasn't. We have Jerry West and a guy, again, I didn't even remember, guy Goodrich.
Goodrich.
Yeah, I guess I did, but I didn't. I'm thinking, again, I'm not thinking of him as you think of, that team. Because Wilt, with 15 rebounds a game and 19 points per game. But so I went back in the day with the Lakers, going with 71-72 Lakers.
So my number 3. Matt, close your ears. Is the 16-17 Warriors. Believe me, I did not want to put them this high either. But they went the 16-1 in the playoffs. They had 3 guys who scored. Steph scored 25-3, KD 25-1, and Clay 22-3. They had 30 road wins. I mean, you got Draymond there, whatever. 67-15 during the regular season. You don't know if they're really there or they win the title if Kawhi doesn't get hurt in Game 1 of the Western Conference Finals, because San Antonio was killing them in that game, and then they swept the Spurs after that or whatever. But believe me, I didn't want to have them this high. I would have rather have his honorable mention or 5, 4, 5 or whatever, but I just couldn't. I thought about if that team played even in a era where the 3 wasn't as prevalent. I just think they didn't have a lot of size, so they might have struggled back in the day or whatever, but I just couldn't put them any lower.
Yeah, they would have struggled with a team like the Celtics that you pointed out earlier because of the game was different, and their big guys don't play like the Celtics' big guys played in that time. That's not how the game is played today.
Right.
So it's apples and oranges.
Celtics couldn't guard them. Yeah, exactly. It's very much apples and oranges.
Because the Celtics would have had a hard time guarding all the threes. Steph Curry is impossible to guard. I just watched him play a game the other night where I was mesmerized by him, and I got no bad things to say about Curry at all, unlike some of these other bums who jump from team to team, Kevin Durant, and Draymond, who's one of the most overrated players I think there is, and most overrated in his own mind because he is not the best defender ever, although he thinks he is. Anyway, my number 3 team is the 90-91 Chicago Bulls, 882 win percentage. 15-2 in the playoffs, 11-1 in the Eastern Conference playoffs. Beat Magic in 5 games. So we got Jordan, we got Pippen, we got Horace Grant, Paxton in that year. Armstrong. They were beating teams by an average of 9 points. They were scoring 110 compared to 101. So a phenomenal team. We talked in a previous podcast about Phil Jackson and his superior coaching abilities, and that's kind of where this thing was started. So I think it was just a phenomenal team. Won a lot of basketball games, and there are guys on that team that anyone today would name. My list has teams really that I saw with my own eyes, which is a little bit biased because some of the teams you mentioned, Jeff, are phenomenal teams, but I didn't see them with my own eyes. So they probably could have made the list or could have made some, maybe I could have bumped off that team I didn't want to put on my list by putting some of those teams I didn't see with my own eyes. But this team, I think kids that even didn't see this team with their own eyes know of this, of this team in folklore, if nothing else. So there you go, the 90-91 Bulls.
Okay, well, my number 2, I did bump them up. I put the Golden State Warriors from 16-17. I tried to really just go, you know what? They didn't cheat. I mean,
it was legal for KD.
It was legal for them to come where he wanted to go there. I mean, I didn't like it either. But when you're talking about overall best teams, I mean, like you said, they went 16-7-15, 16-1 in the postseason, best in NBA history for that. 3 guys over 22 points per game, and a guy, Draymond, as we mentioned, I don't care for him either, but he knew his role, and but I couldn't drop him either. And who knows, back in the day, they didn't. All those players didn't get drafted by their players, so they just didn't follow the ring, but they did go, if they wanted to go play with somebody, they went and played with somebody. So
I guess, but I think that
it's
the
obviously
best
more
player
now.
on the team typically stayed there until such a time he got so old that he didn't stay there anymore.
Because they thought of, but I think the big difference today and before, but is that, all of us have sons and then I think if you talk to them, it's almost more so that a lot of kids now are following players, not teams. Right. And I think that's why some of these guys, they just want to go where they can go and that's it. I mean, KD's going where he's going. People like KD, and it's not affecting him. Right. So.
Well, I think the biggest problem that people have with KD when he went there was that he went from the team that he just got beat in the previous season in the playoffs.
Right.
And to me,
you could never see Jordan, Bird, Magic, any of those guys.
Well, I think of somebody like a Karl Malone or somebody like that they were on the verge all these years and never. Right. They could have easily went.
Right, like a Karl Malone ended up on the Lakers very late in his career. And that's why I said he was really, they were just trying to chase a ring. Right. Whereas Kevin Durant pulled the biggest punk move in his prime, going from the team that just beat, from a team that got beaten by this team and jumping into a team that was already the title. It just seems like a weak move. I mean, I get it. We all want to win a title, but I guess I wouldn't feel like the title meant as much if I did that. And I just couldn't see it. And it's a different age and time, and he's one of the best players in the world, although he can't seem to stay healthy.
No.
So.
All right, so my number 2 is the 86-87 Lakers. I think you had them before.
Yep.
65-17, 15-3, beat Boston in the finals 4-2. Magic's hook shot over Mikhail and Parrish in Game 4 was the key to that series. Let's see. During the season, I guess the regular season, they had 7 players who averaged in double figures. Showtime Fast Break we mentioned, Magic Cream Worthy, Coop Scott, AC Green, Michael Cooper hitting threes, but 86-87 Lakers as my team.
All right, so my 2 was a team you already mentioned, which is the 85-86 Celtics. Which again, you mentioned a lot of things about them. Bird and McHale, you mentioned about that. There was a Bill Walton who was a star, who was not a star anymore because he was having all these injuries, who came to that team and made a huge contribution. I think a great move on the team and also on Walton's willingness to take on that role, which you have to appreciate a little bit because he was one of the best players in the NBA for quite a while. Young kids don't know that about Bill Walton, but he was.
Come up with the Blazers.
Yeah. Paris, Dennis Johnson, Danny Ainge, 67 wins. And they were beating teams by an average of 13 points a game. Now think about
It's not
that.
college. Yeah, this is NBA.
Yeah, 13.
like,
So, I mean, you think about it. I mean, watch an NBA game today, there's plenty of games where you have really good teams that end up beating so-so teams by 2 points, 3 points, 5 points. These are the team, an average, though, they were averaging 114.1 points and their opponents are 101.2. That's a pretty significant differential there, which, kind of helped bump them up on my list. Plus, I think, who did they have to go through to win? Well, they had to go through the Lakers, and that Lakers team from, previous list, 86, 87 Lakers, the next year, that's the team they had to beat to win the title. They were battling each other out, and I think that's part of it, too, is that, at least in my mind, and probably because that's of the age I was at that time, they're just these iconic teams going to battle. And so, the Celtics team at that time just had these guys that, pretty amazing team. So there you go.
All right, so my number 1.
Wait a minute. Before you say it, I have to think, I'm going to say once again here, boys and girls, that our number 1 team may be the same team making these lists independently, because neither one of you two guys put a certain guy on your list anywhere. I did, but you didn't. So I wonder if he's going to show up.
I was going to say, so what year is, I put the 95, 96 Chicago Bulls. They were 72-10, 15-3 in the postseason, outscored opponents by 12 points per game. They had the second most wins ever, which, again, they did it back then, too, not with, as we talked about with the Golden State Warriors. I just, again, let's think of dominance with this team. Of course, Jordan averaged 30 points per game. I mean, think about that, 30 points per game. Pippen at 19 points per game. Heidi and I picked the Bulls at that point, and not being a number 1 team. So
that's who I have as my number 1 too. 95, 96 Bulls. Jordan was MVP. Rodman averaged 14.9 rebounds a game. They beat the Sonics in the finals 4-2. They got up 3-0, let their foot off the gas. That's the only reason they're like that. 33 road wins. They started 37-0 at home. No comparison as far as I'm concerned. They're one, I could have even dropped. I mean, reason Lakers were 2 and Celtics were playing 3 for me is because I like the Lakers. But there was no way this team was getting bumped down to 2 or 3.
So I had the exact same team, 95, 96 Bulls. And again, we make these lists independently of other. We don't talk to each other about them. None of us know, but greatest team of all time? I think so. All the statistics you said, all the guys you said, and again, a great coach putting them all together. You didn't mention Tony Kukoc, who came onto that team. So the second incarnation here, the first incarnation, which I mentioned, the 90-91 Bulls was on my list as a great team. This is the second incarnation after the Jordan retirement and the comeback and bringing in some different guys there working together. This was that team with the Luke Longley and Bill Wennington, and if you don't know those guys, you have no reason to know them because they're not. The only reason that I know them is because they got to work together as a collective unit. So not just having the best player ever.
And watch The Last Dance, like we've talked about, and you'll get to know them a lot better.
Right.
Yeah, and so again, it's one thing to have the best player. It's another thing to put them together into a unit that does what this team did, which I didn't have it written down, but you said they started out 37 wins in a row or something?
37-0. 37-0 at home.
So at that time, and we've said this many a times for guys in our generation, no other team. There's a lot of great teams that never won a title because of these great teams like this. I mean,
a lot of great players.
A lot of great players. One of my favorites of all time, Patrick Ewing, never got there because he had to go through Michael Jordan and these Bulls.
Charles Barkley.
Yeah, Charles Barkley, another one. Malone and Stockton. Yeah. All those guys had to go through these teams and teams, this specific team.
Reggie Miller.
Clyde Drexler.
Yeah.
Well, Clyde got one from the...
Oh, from
Houston, but in Portland he didn't. Yeah.
No, that's what I mean.
Yeah. Right. Yes.
So, just a phenomenal team. So, you got any honorable mentions that we haven't mentioned?
Yeah, so, all right. I don't know if you saw. So, with my list, I had 5 completely different teams. So that's kind of one of the reasons.
Franchises.
Right, franchises. Thank you. That's why I put the Bucks in there. I know they're older and stuff, but because I started writing this all right, the Bulls again. If you didn't know, they won 3 straight and then won another 3 straight, and they would have won 8 straight if Jordan didn't. I'm a firm believer they won 8 straight. You look at the Lakers. I mean, it's just ridiculous. When you look at, seriously, Google or Wikipedia, NBA champions. Like the amount of championships the Lakers won, it's just insane. I mean, it's just right. But I'm saying like both of them, but definitely it's just insane.
Yeah.
So when you start looking at the best teams, like so some of my honorable mentions, I had the 90-91 Bulls, 86-87 Lakers, 01 Lakers, 96-97 Bulls. I had to put the Sixers in. I know you put them in your 5. I had put them in with my honorable mention. And I didn't want to forget the Pistons, 88-89 Pistons either. So
yeah, I have a lot of probably the same. Probably the same. So the 2 Bulls teams you mentioned or whatever. 64-65 Celtics. Did anyone have them or whatever?
No.
So Russell averaged 24.1 rebounds per game that year. Insane. Bad Boys Pistons. I have a couple teams. Actually, I have 3 teams here that no one probably mentioned or whatever. 15-16 Cavs, the one that came back from 3 down 3-1 in the finals. LeBron's chase down block is the famous play in there. The 12-13 Heat. Here we're going with getting together, whatever, super teams or whatever. Where Ray Allen bails out LeBron in Game 6 of that series. And then that's against the Spurs. And then the Spurs the following year, 13-14 Spurs, that probably would have been back-to-back from winning for that.
So I mean, really, I didn't write down a whole lot of honorable mentions, but you could pick any Celtics team from the whole Red Auerbach era, a lot of them, and the Lakers, like you said, and probably call a violation on myself for not putting the Sixers in over the team that I didn't want to. And I'm surprised. I mean, I get your list, but I put the Bulls in there twice because they had Michael Jordan, and those teams were great. So
I just did it like he said, so we didn't have the
So, but there you go, gang. Listen. If you haven't done it, get out there and look up some of these teams, and there's a whole bunch of other ones that have done some pretty amazing things. There's our list of the top NBA teams of all times. You've been listening and watching the 2 Matts and a Jeff podcast. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram, like our YouTube channel, and we will see you next time.